May 1944. The jungles of northeast India had become a battleground. The Japanese had invaded from Burma and were pushing deep into Indian territory. The war, which had seemed distant for so long, had arrived in the heartland. The British Indian Army was mobilizing every available unit to stop the invasion. Among those units were the Gurkha regiments. The soldiers from the mountains of Nepal had come to fight in a war that was not their own. They had come to protect a land that was not their homeland. They had come because they were warriors. The 8th Gurkha Rifles were positioned near Kohima in Nagaland. Kohima was on the Japanese invasion route. The Japanese wanted to take Kohima because it stood between their forces and the major Indian cities. If Kohima fell, the road to India's heartland would open. British commanders knew this. They reinforced Kohima with every soldier they could spare. The 8th Gurkha Rifles took defensive positions around the town. They dug trenches. They laid barbed wire. They prepared positions in the hills above the town. Lachhiman Gurung was a Havildar in the 8th Gurkha Rifles. A Havildar was a sergeant. Lachhiman was 21 years old. He was from a small village in Nepal. He had joined the army 5 years before 16. For 5 years, he had trained. He had fought in training exercises. He had learned the discipline of military life. But he had not yet faced real combat. Lachhiman was a small man. Gurkhas were small men. The Nepalese mountain people were lean and muscular. Years of living in mountains at high altitude had built them for endurance and strength. Lachhiman stood perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed perhaps 140 pounds. He looked like he could be pushed over by a strong wind. Appearances deceived. The Japanese assault on Kohima began on May 4th, 1944. The Japanese had committed 3 divisions to the invasion. They believed they could defeat the British forces and take India. The assault was coordinated across multiple axes. The Japanese attacked from the east, north, and south simultaneously. The British forces were spread thin. The 8th Gurkha Rifles held a small section of the perimeter. Lachhiman Gurung's company was positioned on a hill overlooking one of the Japanese approach routes. The hill was called Garrison Hill. It was high ground. It gave defenders excellent visibility of the valley below. The Japanese would have to advance uphill to reach the position. Uphill assaults are always harder than defending high ground. The British commanders believed they could hold Garrison Hill. The Japanese began their attack with artillery bombardment. Shells rained down on the British positions. Mortar rounds exploded among the trenches. Men screamed. Men died. The defenders took cover in their trenches and held on. The bombardment lasted hours. Then it stopped. The Japanese assault troops began moving up the hill. The Japanese soldiers were professional fighters. They had been fighting in China for years. They had fought in Malaya. They had fought in Burma. They knew how to conduct infantry assaults. They came in waves. Each wave tried to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers and aggressive violence. The defenders fired into the waves. The advancing Japanese fell. But more Japanese came. Lachhiman Gurung was in a forward trench with 2 comrades. The trench was small, just a foxhole really. 2 men could fight from it. The 3rd man would rest or reload ammunition. The Japanese assault came directly at their position. Lachhiman's section was at the critical point of the line. The Japanese knew this. They concentrated their forces against this position. The Japanese began throwing grenades into the trench. The grenades were potato masher grenades, stick grenades with a charge at one end and a wooden handle. They were different from the round grenades the British used. They looked strange, but they worked the same way. A grenade landed in the trench. Lachhiman grabbed it quickly. He threw it back without hesitation. The grenade exploded just outside the trench. Fragments scattered. No one in the trench was hit. Another grenade landed. Lachhiman grabbed it again and threw it back. Another explosion just outside. Again, no hits in the trench. The Japanese saw what was happening. They were not trying to kill Lachhiman with grenades. They were trying to pin him down to make him stay in the trench and not use his rifle. But the Japanese had not counted on the Gurkha spirit. Lachhiman was not pinned down. He was angry. He was ready to fight. Then a 3rd grenade landed. This one fell inside the trench, down into the foxhole where Lachhiman and his men were crouching. There was no time to throw it back. There was no time to do anything. Lachhiman made a choice. He dove on the grenade. No, that is not what happened. Lachhiman saw the grenade coming. He reached for it. He grabbed it. He tried to throw it back. But the throw was not clean. His hand was not in the right position. The grenade exploded in his right hand. The explosion was enormous in the small space of the trench. His right hand was obliterated. His fingers were severed completely. The blast was so powerful that it shattered bones in his right arm. Shrapnel tore into his face. His right eye was hit. Blood filled the eye socket immediately. Shrapnel embedded in his leg. More shrapnel in his body. He was devastated by the blast. His two comrades were also hit. One was seriously wounded. One was unable to continue fighting. They lay at the bottom of the trench, bleeding, in shock. Lachhiman was alone. He was wounded. His right hand was destroyed. His right eye was filling with blood. But he was still alive. He still had his rifle. The Japanese soldier screamed. They saw the explosion. They believed the defenders were finished. They formed up shoulder to shoulder for a final assault. They came up the slope in a mass. They were going to overwhelm the position through sheer numbers and aggressive violence. They were going to kill the survivors and take the hill. Lachhiman grabbed his rifle with his left hand. His right hand was useless, destroyed, hanging limp at his side. He had never fired a rifle left-handed. He was right-handed. The British Army had trained him right-handed. But he was a Gurkha. Gurkhas are adaptable. Gurkhas are warriors. He brought up the rifle with his left hand. The Japanese were 50 yards away, then 40 yards, then 30 yards. Lachhiman fired. The rifle was a Lee Enfield .303 caliber. It was one of the most reliable rifles in the world. Firing left-handed would be awkward. Reloading left-handed would be almost impossible. Lachhiman fired. A Japanese soldier fell. He worked the bolt with his left hand. He fired again. Another Japanese soldier fell. He worked the bolt again. He fired again. The rate of fire was slow. Lachhiman had never done this before, but the bullets were going where they needed to go. The Japanese soldiers kept coming. Lachhiman kept firing. His left hand worked the rifle. The bolt moved forward and backward. The rounds chambered. The rounds fired. The Japanese fell. One after another, they fell. Lachhiman was bleeding profusely. His right hand was destroyed. His face was torn open. His right eye was swollen shut. His leg was bleeding. He was in shock. The pain was beyond comprehension. But his training held. Gurkha training held. The warrior spirit held. He kept firing. The Japanese kept coming. An hour passed. 2 hours. The sun was rising. The Japanese continued to attack. Lachhiman continued to fire. 3 hours had passed. 4 hours. All through the night and into the morning, Lachhiman Gurung had held his position with one hand, firing his rifle into wave after wave of Japanese soldiers. He had not left the trench. He had not surrendered. He had not stopped fighting. When the Japanese finally withdrew, the sun was high in the sky. The Japanese had lost. The position held. Lachhiman still stood in the trench, rifle in his left hand, blood streaming from his wounds. His two comrades were still unable to move. The British soldiers came to retrieve the wounded. They found Lachhiman still at his post. They found him still standing. They found him still ready to fight. The count came later. Of the Japanese soldiers who had attacked Lachhiman's position, 200 had been counted. Of those 200, 87 were dead. 31 of those 87 were lying in front of Lachhiman's trench. 31 Japanese soldiers had been killed by one man, firing a rifle one-handed, with one eye blinded, while bleeding to death from wounds. The medics treated Lachhiman's wounds as best they could. His right hand could not be saved. Most of his fingers were gone. His right arm was fractured in multiple places. His right eye had been destroyed by shrapnel. They gave him what medical care they could and evacuated him to a hospital. Lachhiman was hospitalized for months. His right eye was gone. He would be blind in that eye for the rest of his life. His right arm was saved, but was severely damaged. He would never have full use of that arm again. His right hand would remain mostly paralyzed. He was permanently disabled, but he was alive, and he had held the line. The British Army recognized his actions. Lachhiman Gurung was recommended for the Victoria Cross. The Victoria Cross is the highest military decoration for valor in the face of the enemy. It is awarded only for the most extraordinary bravery. It is awarded rarely. In 1944, Lachhiman Gurung was awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions on May 18, 1944, at Kohima. The citation read, "On May 18, 1944, at Kohima, Havildar Lachhiman Gurung displayed the most conspicuous bravery. When Japanese grenades came in, he immediately threw them back. A grenade landed in the trench near him. He immediately picked up his rifle and fired into the grenades, detonating them. All the time, he kept up his rifle fire into the attacking Japanese. For 4 hours he maintained this position, often throwing back grenades. The citation was slightly different from the actual events, but the spirit was correct. Lachhiman Gurung had displayed extraordinary bravery. He had held his position alone. He had killed at least 31 enemy soldiers. He had refused to surrender or fall back, even though he was surrounded and overwhelmed. Lachhiman Gurung returned to Nepal after the war. His Victoria Cross was presented to him by the King of Britain. He was a national hero in Nepal. He lived until 1965. He never forgot what he had done on that hill. The 8th Gurkha Rifles suffered tremendous casualties during the war. The entire regiment was nearly annihilated at times. But they held. They did not break. They did not surrender. They fought with a discipline and courage that amazed the British officers who commanded them. Gurkhas earned 2,760 awards for bravery or distinguished service during World War II. 12 Victoria Crosses were awarded to Gurkhas. 333 military crosses were awarded. The Military Cross is the second highest award for valor. Gurkhas earned more military crosses than any other unit in the British Army. Gurkhas suffered 20,000 casualties during the war. 9,000 died. 13,000 were wounded or missing. The Gurkha regiments fought in almost every theater of the war. They fought in Syria. They fought in North Africa. They fought in Italy. They fought in Greece. They fought against the Japanese in Burma, Northeast India, and Singapore. They served with distinction in every operation. The Japanese feared the Gurkhas. Japanese soldiers had learned through hard experience that Gurkhas were not the same as other British soldiers. Gurkhas did not surrender. Gurkhas did not break. Gurkhas fought to the death. The Japanese respected this, but they feared it. Lachhiman Gurung was not unique. There were other Gurkhas who performed extraordinary acts of bravery. There were Gurkhas who single-handedly held positions. There were Gurkhas who charged machine gun nests with only a knife. There were Gurkhas who refused to retreat when ordered to do so. The Gurkha reputation was built on stories like Lachhiman Gurung's. It was built on the willingness to fight no matter the odds. It was built on the refusal to surrender. It was built on the warrior spirit that had been part of the Gurkha culture for centuries. After the war, the Gurkha regiments continued to serve. They served in the Korean War. They served in Malaysia, fighting communist insurgents. They served in the Falkland Islands. They served in the Gulf Wars. They served in Afghanistan. To this day, Gurkha units continue to serve in the British Army. The name Gurkha has become synonymous with courage and soldier excellence. When British military leaders talk about what makes a good soldier, they often reference the Gurkhas. When historians talk about World War II, they mention the extraordinary performance of the Gurkha regiments. When soldiers talk about inspiration, they talk about men like Lachhiman Gurung. Lachhiman Gurung's actions on May 18, 1944, were documented in military records. They were recorded in the official history of the 8th Gurkha Rifles. They were documented in the British Army history. They were recorded by witnesses who were there. His Victoria Cross citation is part of the official record of the war. What makes Lachhiman's story extraordinary is not just that he killed 31 enemy soldiers while single-handedly defending a position. What makes it extraordinary is the circumstances. He was wounded so severely that he should have died. He had a destroyed right hand. He had a damaged right arm. He had a damaged right eye. He was bleeding profusely. He was in shock from his wounds. He should have been incapacitated. He should have been unable to continue fighting. But he did continue fighting. He fought for 4 hours with those wounds. He fought alone. His 2 comrades were unable to help him. The Japanese kept attacking. The Japanese kept coming in waves. The Japanese had superior numbers. The Japanese had the advantage of the terrain to some extent, attacking uphill but with numbers. Yet Lachhiman Gurung held. He held with one hand. He held with one eye. He held with multiple serious wounds. He held because he was a warrior. He held because he was a Gurkha. The message of Lachhiman's story is not just about military tactics or combat effectiveness. The message is about the human spirit. It is about what a person can accomplish when they refuse to give up. It is about what happens when training and character and discipline combine with absolute determination. Lachhiman Gurung proved that day that the body can do what the mind commands, even when the body is severely damaged. He proved that courage is real. He proved that it can make a difference. He proved that one man, wounded beyond what seems possible to survive, can hold the line. That is why the story of Lachhiman Gurung endures 80 years after the war. That is why his Victoria Cross is one of the most famous Victoria Crosses of the war. That is why he is remembered as one of the greatest soldiers of World War II. He came from a small village in Nepal to fight in a war that was not his own. He was wounded so severely that doctors were amazed he survived. He lost the use of his right hand. He lost the sight in his right eye. He was permanently disabled by his wounds. But he had held the line. He had killed 31 enemy soldiers while single-handedly defending a position. That is the story of Lachhiman Gurung. That is the story of a Gurkha warrior. That is the story of one man who refused to surrender, no matter the cost.